piece of news that we've heard about the deputy president in recent times, him talking about, he was actually addressing the former governor of Meru, Kiraitu Murungi, asking him to get the former president so that the mountain can move together, which was quite telling. And we heard what Rigathi Gachagua said about asking politicians in the opposition not to target the current deputy president. And we're asking the questions, what exactly is happening? Now, on the front page, we have this letter signed by Felix Koskei, who's the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service, seemingly transferring one of the serious roles that had been vested in the deputy president to a different office. And one wonders, is this purely coincidental, or is there something really happening under the water?
Thank you very much. Like they say, there are no coincidences in politics. Well, at least not in this country. They say in Kiswahili, palipo na moshi, hapakosi moto. So, and like they say, that what goes out comes round. The current president did experience, as it were, whatever hardship that he had with President Uhuru during his period. And he vowed that no deputy president, no one should be subjected to what I have been subjected to. Now, when you look at the utterances of Honorable Kindiki, and you align that with the expectations of William Ruto in getting him on board through the unconstitutional and illegal means of the impeachment of Honorable Rigathi Gachagua. And I'm not going to go into that because the cases are pending adjudication in court. But suffice it to say that Kindiki is the beneficiary of what I would euphemistically say a rotten process. And therefore, the stench that comes from that is inevitable. And what do I mean? Now, indeed, the president has, if you look at the Constitution under Article 132, sub-Article 3B of the Constitution, for instance, it gives him the power to assign any cabinet secretary, whatever power under the Constitution to execute those powers. So he is, as it were, within that constitutional mandate under Article 132, 3B of the Constitution. However, when you now join that, juxtapose that, as it were, with what has been said, what has been happening with Professor Kithure Kindiki, I don't think it's a slip of the tongue for him to have, uttered whatever he had said. Even the Bible says that from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So it came from him. It wasn't a slip of the tongue that, these people who are talking about two-term, forget about it, is out of the consideration. And I agree with him. And I say here before that, look, any person who stood for election in the year 2022 has a 5-year term, quote unquote, guaranteed under the Constitution. You are not guaranteed, and there is absolutely no way you can speak of a two-term unless and until you can pinpoint to the Constitution that tells you that once you are elected on a one-time ticket, then you are guaranteed for a two-term. There is no such thing. So let's disabuse ourselves and let everybody be disabused of this idea that Kindiki, spoke out of turn or out of the context of the Constitution. He did say actually what the Constitution says, but that is again political, should I say, it was going to precipitate the fallout with his, principle, the appointing authority, not electing.
You're talking about a fallout. Do you see a fallout? Because
I absolutely see.
But Mutambu doesn't see the same.
I see a fallout. You see, for President Ruto, what he is looking for is the ability for you to leverage on your voters, whatever you have as your backyard. That Kindiki can be seen that if you flow with the Mount Kenya region, the person with a say is Rigathi, is not, in fact, any other politician out there, and to that extent, Kindiki is subservient to Rigathi. And Rigathi, as you know, then they are out there on a warpath with Ruto. So, in my view, Ruto sees that going forward, Kindiki has nothing to bring on the table. And because of that, then he has to then maneuver Of course, he is constricted, as it were, by the Constitution, that tomorrow he cannot tell Kindiki, exit the platform and go. But I had this hunch, and I could be wrong, that in fact, when Kindiki was being illegally and unconstitutionally incepted into this portfolio, this position of deputy president, he somehow was compelled, and I've said about this before, sign right here, your resignation, undated. So he's got, Ruto is armed with that resignation letter, which can, in my view, as I finish that point, which in my view prompted Kindiki to say, oh, there were those people who were telling me, exit, and therefore, you can't leave a house that you built out there, and then you go live in the forest. I can't do that. So I think in my view that Ruto is armed with a resignation letter, and therefore, for whatever contrived reason, it may be that before we get the 2022 election, you will hear an announcement. Now, once the formations are crystallized, and then you see eventually that probably, the Mulembe Nation has gravitated towards Sifuna, and therefore Ruto feels that I need to at least bring some equilibrium here so that I can get it on my side. He may have someone from there, and therefore compel Kindiki then to get into some circumstance, maybe self-embarrassing circumstance, that will then compel him then to brandish this resignation letter. Remember, I say, he is with Ruto at the moment, just undated. Right.
And you're not the only one who's thinking that way. Your colleague in the profession, that's Senior Counsel Ahmed Nasir Abdullahi, says, I don't think President William Ruto will drop Professor Kithure Kindiki as his running mate for the 2027 presidential election. I think Professor Kindiki will be very understanding and resign. Either way, it must be before October 2026 or it will be too late. He also goes ahead because he's been monitoring Kindiki, and he says, desperate time calls for desperate measure. Asking Uhuru to support President Ruto is the epitome of political desperation and a very foolish plea indeed. Eyes are on Professor Kithure Kindiki either way. And we'll be continuing with these discussions after the break. You're watching TV47 Breakfast.